What would you do if you discovered that the person living under your roof held the secret to true happiness, and you had been blind to it all along? Before we begin this incredible journey, please like this story, share it with someone you love, and subscribe so you never miss a tale that touches a heart. And tell us in the comments where you are watching from, because we absolutely love hearing from you. Now, let us step into a world where everything is about to change. Richard Blackwood owned everything money could buy. His mansion stretched across 10 acres of perfectly trimmed gardens. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings so high they seemed to touch the clouds. Gold frames held paintings worth more than most people earned in their entire lives. Marble floors reflected his image wherever he walked, smooth and cold beneath his expensive leather shoes. But Richard was not happy. Every morning, he woke up in a bed big enough for 5 people, yet he felt small and alone. He ate breakfast at a table that could seat 20 guests, but no one ever joined him. The silence in his home was so thick you could almost touch it. It wrapped around him like a heavy blanket he could not throw off. Richard had 30 people working in his mansion. They cleaned his floors, cooked his meals, tended his gardens, and made sure everything sparkled like new, but he barely noticed them. To him, they were like the furniture, just part of the house. He never asked their names. He never wondered about their lives. They were simply there, doing their jobs, invisible. Among these workers was Maria. She had been his maid for 3 years. Every day, she arrived before sunrise and left after sunset. She cleaned the guest rooms on the 3rd floor, dusted the library, and polished the silverware until it shone. Maria was quiet and kind. She never complained, even when the work was hard. She smiled at the other staff members and sometimes hummed soft tunes while she worked. Richard had probably seen Maria 100 times, but he could not have described her face if someone asked. She was just the maid. Nothing more. One Tuesday morning, everything changed. Richard woke up earlier than usual. The sun had barely started to peek through his bedroom curtains. He felt restless, unable to sleep. He decided to take a walk through his mansion, something he rarely did. Usually, he went straight from his bedroom to his office, then to his car, then back again. But today felt different somehow. He walked down the long hallway on the 3rd floor, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. The guest rooms lined both sides, their doors closed and silent. At the very end of the hall was a small door he had never really noticed before. It looked different from the others, older and more worn, paint peeled slightly at the edges. Richard had always assumed it was a storage closet, or perhaps a room for old furniture. He had never thought to open it, never cared enough to wonder. But this morning, his curiosity stirred. Maybe he could turn it into another office. Maybe there was something valuable stored inside that he had forgotten about. He reached for the doorknob and turned it. The door was unlocked. It swung open with a soft creak. What Richard saw inside made him freeze. The room was tiny, barely bigger than his walk-in closet. The walls were plain and painted a faded cream color. There was no expensive artwork, no gold frames, no crystal decorations. A single bed sat against one wall, covered with a simple blue blanket that had been carefully smoothed. A small wooden table stood by the window, and on it sat a worn book, a candle, and a photograph in a cheap plastic frame. But it was the window that caught his attention most. Sunlight poured through it like liquid gold, filling the small space with the warmest, most beautiful light Richard had ever seen. The window was open just a crack, and a gentle breeze moved the thin white curtain, making it dance like a living thing. The room felt different from the rest of his mansion. It felt alive. It felt peaceful. It felt like someone actually lived here, not just existed. Richard stepped inside, his heart beating faster. He looked around in confusion. This was not a storage room. Someone lived here. But who? Then he saw more details. A pair of worn shoes sat neatly by the bed. A simple dress hung on a hook behind the door. On the windowsill were 3 small stones, smooth and gray, arranged in a careful line. Next to the stones was a tiny plant in a cracked pot, its green leaves reaching toward the sunlight. Everything in the room was old and simple, but everything was cared for. Everything had a place. Everything mattered to someone. Richard picked up the photograph from the table. It showed a young boy, maybe 10 years old, with a bright smile and eyes full of hope. The frame was scratched and the picture was faded, but it had been placed with such care, right where the morning light would touch it first. His hands trembled as he set the photo down. Beneath it was a letter, folded many times and soft from being read over and over. He knew he should not read it. He knew it was private. But something pulled at him, a need to understand. He unfolded the letter carefully. The handwriting was simple but neat. Dear Mama, thank you for everything you do. I know you work hard so I can go to school. I promise I will study and make you proud. I pray for you every night. I love you more than all the stars. Your son, Tommy. Richard felt something crack inside his chest. This room belonged to Maria. This was where she slept after cleaning his massive, empty mansion all day. This tiny space, smaller than his bathroom, was her home. And suddenly, standing in that small room filled with sunlight and love, surrounded by things that cost almost nothing but meant everything, Richard Blackwood felt ashamed. For the first time in years, he wondered if he had been living his life completely wrong. Richard quickly left the room and closed the door softly behind him. His heart pounded in his chest. He felt like he had seen something he was not supposed to see, like he had opened a treasure chest that belonged to someone else. All day, he could not stop thinking about that little room. During his business meetings, his mind wandered to the sunlight streaming through that window. While eating his lunch alone at his enormous table, he pictured the simple blue blanket on that small bed. The image of the young boy in the photograph kept appearing in his thoughts. He realized he did not even know Maria had a son. He did not know anything about her at all. That evening, Richard did something he had never done before. Instead of going straight to his study after dinner, he waited in the kitchen. He sat on one of the tall stools by the counter, feeling awkward and out of place. The chef and other kitchen staff looked at him with surprise but said nothing. When Maria came in carrying a tray of dishes, she nearly dropped it when she saw him. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Is something wrong? Do you need something?" Richard stood up quickly. "No, nothing is wrong. I just wanted to talk to you." Maria set down the tray carefully. Her hands were red from cleaning all day, and her uniform had a small stain on the sleeve. She looked tired, but her eyes were kind. "Talk to me, sir," she asked, confused. Richard did not know how to begin. He had never had a real conversation with any of his staff before. "I saw your room this morning," he said finally. "I opened the door by accident. I am sorry for entering without permission." Maria's face went pale. "Oh," she whispered. "I hope everything was acceptable, sir. I keep it very clean. I promise I do not make any trouble." No, Richard said quickly. "It was very clean. Very peaceful, actually." He paused, searching for the right words. "I saw you have a window that gets beautiful morning light." Maria's expression softened. A small smile appeared on her tired face. "Yes, sir. That window is my favorite part of the whole mansion. Every morning, the sun comes through it like a gift." "I notice you have very few things," Richard continued carefully, "but everything seems important to you. When you do not have much, you treasure what you have." Maria said simply, "My grandmother used to say that empty hands can hold more love than full ones." Richard thought about his mansion stuffed with expensive things that brought him no joy. "I saw the photograph of a boy. Your son." Maria's whole face lit up. "Yes, sir. That is Tommy. He is 10 years old. He lives with my mother in the village outside the city, so he can go to school there. I only see him once a month on my day off, but I think about him every single moment." "That must be very hard," Richard said, and he meant it. "It is the hardest thing in the world," Maria admitted. Her eyes became wet with tears, but she blinked them away. "But I work here so I can pay for his school, his books, his uniform. I want him to have chances I never had. I want him to become something more." Richard felt his throat tighten. "The letter I saw, did he write that?" Maria nodded. "He writes to me every week. I read his letters every night before I sleep. They help me remember why I am here, why I work so hard." "What do you do in your room besides read his letters?" Richard asked. He thought about the book on the table, the candle, the peaceful feeling that filled the space. Maria looked down at her hands. I pray, sir. You pray? Every morning when the sun comes up, and every night before I sleep, Maria said quietly. I pray for my son. I pray he stays healthy and happy. I pray his teachers are kind. I pray he grows up to be a good man. She paused. And I pray for other people too. What other people? Richard asked, truly curious now. I pray for the other workers here, that their families are safe. I pray for people who are sick or lonely. And I pray for you, sir. Richard took a step back in surprise. For me? Why would you pray for me? Maria met his eyes with such gentle honesty that Richard had to look away. Because you have so much, sir, but you do not seem happy. I pray that you find whatever it is you are searching for. I pray that your heart finds peace. No one had ever said anything like that to Richard before. No one had ever seen through his wealth to the emptiness underneath. He felt naked, exposed, but also somehow relieved that someone finally saw the truth. How did you know I am not happy? He whispered. I see you every day, sir, walking through this big house all alone. I see how you never smile. I clean your study, and I see you work until very late every night. You have beautiful things everywhere, but no pictures of people you love. No letters that make you smile. I have almost nothing, but when I sit by my window in the morning light, I feel like the richest person in the world. Richard sat down heavily on the stool. How is that possible? How can you feel rich in that tiny room? Maria pulled out another stool and sat down beside him. The chef and other staff had quietly left, giving them privacy. My grandmother taught me something when I was a little girl, she said. She told me that people spend their whole lives building walls around themselves. Big walls made of money and power and things. They think the walls will keep them safe. But really, the walls just keep them trapped and alone. What did she say to do instead? Richard asked. She said to build windows, not walls. Windows let the light in. Windows let you see other people and let them see you. Windows remind you that you are part of something bigger than yourself. Richard thought about his mansion. So many walls. So many closed doors. So few windows that he actually looked through. Is that why you pray by your window? Yes, sir. When I pray there, I feel connected to my son even though he is far away. I feel connected to God. I feel connected to everyone else in the world who is praying too. The light comes in, and I remember that I am not alone. I never have been. They sat in silence for a moment. The kitchen was quiet except for the soft tick of the clock on the wall. Can I ask you something? Richard said finally. Your son's school, how much does it cost? Maria looked uncomfortable. I do not want to talk about money, sir. You pay me fairly. I manage. But how much does it cost? Richard pressed gently. Maria sighed. The school fees are due next week. $500 for the term. I have been saving, but I am still short. I will have to ask my mother to help, and I know she does not have much either. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. If I cannot pay, Tommy might have to leave the school. He would have to go to the free school in the village, where the classes are too big and the teachers are overwhelmed. $500. Richard spent more than that on a single dinner at his favorite restaurant. He spent that much on shoes he wore once and forgot about. What if someone helped you? Richard asked carefully. What if the money appeared somehow? Maria shook her head firmly. I do not take charity, sir. I work for what I have. That is important to me. It is important that Tommy sees his mother working hard, being honest, standing on her own feet. Richard admired her pride, but also frustrated him. Here was someone who needed help so badly, and she was too proud to accept it. What if it was not charity, he said. What if someone just wanted to do something kind, anonymously, without expecting anything back? Maria looked at him with those knowing eyes again. Are you planning something, Mr. Blackwood? Maybe, Richard admitted. Would that be so wrong? Maria stood up and picked up her tray of dishes again. Light always finds a way into dark places, sir. Whether through a window, a crack in the door, or a kind act from an unexpected source. I have learned not to refuse light when it comes. She smiled at him, a real smile that made her whole face glow. But the greatest gift you could give me is not money. The greatest gift would be if you found your own window, your own light. That would make me happier than anything." She walked toward the kitchen door, then turned back. "Thank you for talking to me tonight, sir. You have no idea how much it means to be seen, to be heard." After she left, Richard sat alone in the kitchen for a long time. He thought about windows and walls. He thought about prayers and light. He thought about a woman who had almost nothing but felt rich, and a man who had everything but felt empty. The next morning, Richard woke up before sunrise. He walked quietly down the hallway to that small door at the end. He stood outside it listening. From inside, he heard Maria's soft voice, whispering prayers. He did not open the door. He did not interrupt. He just stood there and listened to her thanking God for another day, asking for blessings for her son, and yes, praying for the lonely man who owned the mansion where she worked. Richard walked back to his own room with tears in his eyes. For the first time in his life, he knelt down beside his enormous bed. He did not really know how to pray, but he folded his hands and whispered into the quiet morning, "Please help me find my window. Please help me see the light." And somewhere in that big, cold mansion, something began to change. Richard did not sleep much that night. His mind raced with plans and ideas. By morning, he knew exactly what he needed to do. He called his assistant into his office. "I need you to do something for me," he said, "and it needs to be completely secret." His assistant raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Of course, sir. What do you need?" "Find out which school Maria's son attends. Pay his fees for the entire year. No, pay for the next 3 years. And arrange for him to have new books, a new uniform, whatever he needs." Richard paused. "But Maria must never know it came from me. Make it look like a scholarship from the school. Can you do that?" His assistant smiled, the first real smile Richard had seen from him in years. "Yes, sir, I can do that." "Good. And one more thing. Find out if any of the other staff have children in school. Pay their fees, too. All of them. Anonymously." The assistant's smile grew wider. "Right away, sir." But Richard was not finished. Over the next few days, he did something else he had never done before. He started noticing the people who worked in his mansion. He learned their names. He asked about their families. He discovered that his gardener had a sick wife who needed medicine. He found out that his cook had a daughter who wanted to be a nurse but could not afford training. Richard helped them all, quietly, without making a big announcement. He paid for the medicine. He funded the nursing program. He fixed a leaky roof in the home of his driver. He did these things not because he wanted praise or gratitude, but because for the first time in his life, he understood that his wealth meant nothing if it only served himself. One week after his conversation with Maria, Richard did something that shocked everyone in the mansion. He invited all the staff to have dinner with him in the main dining room. 30 people gathered around his enormous table, the table that had always been empty except for him. The cook prepared a feast. Everyone sat together, talking and laughing. Richard sat at the head of the table. But for once, he did not feel alone. He felt surrounded by life, by warmth, by real human connection. Maria sat near him, looking uncomfortable in such a fancy setting. "Sir, this is too much," she whispered. "We should be serving you, not sitting with you." "Why?" Richard asked. "Why should you serve me while I eat alone? Why should there be walls between us?" He raised his glass. "I want to thank all of you. For years, you have taken care of my home, and I never took care of you. I never saw you. I was blind, but I am trying to see now. I am trying to build windows instead of walls." Maria's eyes filled with tears. She understood what he meant. Around the table, people nodded and smiled. Some of them cried too. After dinner, Maria approached Richard. "Sir, something amazing happened today. Tommy's school called me. They said he has been given a scholarship. They will pay for everything, his fees, his books, his uniform. They said he was chosen because of his good grades and kind heart." She was crying openly now. "It is a miracle. I prayed for this, but I never thought it would actually happen." Richard smiled but said nothing. He just squeezed her hand gently. "I do not know how to thank God enough. Maria continued. My prayers were answered. Maybe that is how prayers work, Richard said softly. Maybe God answers them through people, through kind acts, through open doors and open hearts. The days turned into weeks. Richard began waking up early every morning, before sunrise. He would walk to the hallway and stand outside Maria's door, listening to her pray. He never interrupted. He never opened the door. But hearing her voice, so full of faith and hope, gave him strength for the day ahead. Then one morning, he did something different. Instead of just listening, he knelt down right there in the hallway. He closed his eyes and began to pray too. He prayed for Maria and her son. He prayed for all the people in his mansion. He prayed for forgiveness for all the years he had lived only for himself. And he prayed for the courage to keep changing, to keep opening windows in his heart. When he opened his eyes, Maria was standing in front of him. She had opened her door and found him kneeling there. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then, without saying a word, Maria knelt down beside him in the hallway. They prayed together as the sunrise began to paint the walls with golden light. Two people from completely different worlds brought together by an accidental door opening, now sharing the same simple faith, the same hope, the same light. Sir, Maria said when they finished praying, would you like to see the sunrise from my window? It is the most beautiful view in the whole mansion. Richard followed her into the tiny room. They stood together by the window as the sun climbed above the horizon. Light poured through the glass like liquid gold, exactly as he remembered. But this time, he was not alone. This time, he was sharing it with someone who understood what it meant. You were right, Richard said quietly. This is the most beautiful view in the mansion. How did I miss it all these years? You were looking at the wrong things, Maria said gently. You were counting your gold and your paintings and your furniture. But none of those things can give you what you really needed. What did I need? Richard asked, though he already knew the answer. You needed to matter to someone. You needed to care about someone. You needed to know that your life made a difference in someone else's life. Maria pointed to the 3 smooth stones on her windowsill. See those stones? Tommy picked those for me from the river near his school. They are not worth any money. But when I look at them, I feel loved. That is what real wealth is. Richard thought about all his expensive possessions. None of them made him feel the way those 3 simple stones made Maria feel. I have been living in a prison of my own making, he said. A golden prison, but a prison all the same. Then stop being a prisoner, Maria said. You have the key. You have always had the key. You just needed someone to remind you where to look for it. From that day forward, everything changed in the mansion. Richard opened the curtains in every room, letting light flood into spaces that had been dark for years. He took down some of the expensive paintings and replaced them with photographs of staff and their families. He turned one of the guest rooms into a library where anyone in the mansion could come to read and study. He started eating breakfast with his cook and his gardener. He played chess with his driver. He asked his housekeeper to teach him how to make bread. His mansion became filled with laughter and conversation, with life and purpose. Richard learned that Maria had a day off coming up, the one day each month when she went to visit Tommy. I would like to meet him, Richard said. Would that be all right? Maria looked surprised but pleased. Of course, sir. He would be honored. So Richard drove Maria to the village where Tommy lived. It was a simple place, nothing like his wealthy neighborhood. But the people smiled and waved at each other. Children played in the streets. Gardens overflowed with vegetables and flowers. Tommy ran out of his grandmother's house when they arrived. He hugged his mother so tightly that they both nearly fell over. Then he turned to Richard with big, curious eyes. This is Mr. Blackwood, Maria said. He is my employer. Tommy shook Richard's hand very seriously. Thank you for being kind to my mama, sir. She works very hard. Your mama is the wisest person I have ever met, Richard said. I am lucky to know her. They spent the day together, the 3 of them and Maria's mother. They ate simple food and told stories and laughed until their stomachs hurt. Richard could not remember the last time he had laughed like that. Maybe he never had. When it was time to leave, Tommy gave Richard a gift. It was a drawing he had made, showing a big house with sunshine coming through a window. Mama told me about her special window, Tommy explained. She said it makes her happy even on hard days. I drew this, so you can remember that too. Richard took the drawing carefully, like it was made of gold. Thank you, Tommy. I will treasure this forever. On the drive back, Maria said, You did not have to spend your day off with us, sir. I know you have important things to do. I did not have anything more important than this, Richard said honestly. Today was one of the best days of my life. The weeks turned into months. Richard's business continued to succeed, but now he measured his success differently. He measured it by the number of people he helped. He measured it by the smiles he saw around his table. He measured it by the warmth he felt in his heart instead of the coldness that used to fill it. One morning, Richard woke before dawn as usual. He walked to Maria's hallway and knelt down to pray. But this time, when Maria opened her door, she said, Why do you pray out here in the hallway? You know, you are always welcome to pray with me by the window. So Richard followed her into the tiny room. They knelt together by the window as the sun began to rise. The light came through the glass, warm and golden, touching their faces, filling the small space with glory. Thank you, Richard whispered. Thank you for teaching me how to see. Thank you for showing me that true wealth has nothing to do with money. Thank you for opening a window in my heart. Maria smiled. I did not do anything special, sir. I just lived my life the way I always have. You were the one brave enough to walk through an open door and let yourself be changed. They prayed together as the sun climbed higher. They thanked God for second chances, for accidental discoveries, for tiny rooms that held more peace than enormous mansions. They prayed for all the people in the world who were still searching for happiness in the wrong places. They prayed that everyone would find their own window, their own light. When they finished, they stood and looked out at the sunrise together. Two lives, one separated by so much, now united by so little. A door opened by accident, a conversation in a kitchen, prayers whispered in the dawn. Such small things, really. But small things, Richard had learned, were often the most powerful things of all. The mansion feels different now, Richard said. It feels alive. That is because you are alive now, Maria replied. Before, you were just existing, moving through your days like a ghost. But now you are really living. You are connected to people. You are part of something bigger than yourself. You have finally stepped into the light. Richard looked around the tiny room one more time. The simple bed, the worn book, the 3 stones on the windowsill, the photograph of a smiling boy, the cheap plastic frame catching the morning sun. This room, smaller than his closet, had changed his entire life. This room, which held almost nothing, had taught him everything that mattered. I used to think I was rich because I had so much, Richard said quietly. But you were always the rich one. You knew the secret all along. And what secret is that? Maria asked. That heaven is not a place you go when you die. Heaven is a choice you make every single day. Heaven is opening your heart. Heaven is caring about someone else more than yourself. Heaven is 3 stones on a windowsill, and a letter from your son, and sunshine through a window, and prayers whispered at dawn. He turned to face her. Heaven is wherever love lives. Maria's eyes sparkled with tears. Now you understand, sir. Now you truly see. They walked out of the room together, leaving the door open behind them. Light spilled from that small space into the hallway, reaching farther than seemed possible, touching the dark corners of the enormous mansion, warming everything it touched. And Richard knew, with absolute certainty, that he would never close that door again. He would never return to his old life of walls and loneliness. He had found his window. He had found his light. And he was never going back to the dark. The mansion was no longer just a building. It was a home, a sanctuary, a place where people mattered more than possessions, where kindness was the greatest currency, where every sunrise brought a new chance to choose love over pride, connection over isolation, grace over gold. Richard Blackwood had everything money could buy, but it was only when he learned to see through the eyes of a humble maid that he finally discovered what it meant to be truly, deeply abundantly rich. The sunrise painted the world in shades of pink and gold. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang. The day was beginning, full of promise and possibility. And in a mansion that had once been so cold and empty, two people stood side by side, grateful for an accidental door that opened to reveal the greatest treasure of all, the treasure of the human heart, the treasure of simple faith, the treasure of seeing and being seen, of loving and being loved, of giving without counting the cost, and receiving without feeling unworthy. That morning, as every morning after, they prayed together by the window, and the light that filled that small room spread throughout the mansion, throughout their lives, throughout the world, one prayer, one kind act, one open door at a time, because that is how light works. It starts small, just a crack in the darkness, just a window opened, just a door that someone walks through by accident. But once it begins, once you let it in, light cannot be stopped. It grows and spreads and touches everything. It transforms prisons into sanctuaries. It turns strangers into family. It makes mansions into homes and millionaires into men who finally understand what matters. In the end, Richard learned the most important lesson of his life, not from books or business deals or anything money could buy. He learned it from a woman who cleaned his floors and slept in the smallest room and prayed by a window every morning. He learned that the richest life is a life of giving. The fullest heart is a heart that loves. The brightest light is the light we share with others. And the greatest treasure is not what we keep for ourselves, but what we give away. The door remained open. The window remained bright. And two souls, one separated by everything that does not matter, remained united by everything that does. If you were moved by this story of transformation and grace, please like and share it with someone who needs to hear this message today. Subscribe so you never miss stories that touch the heart and remind us what truly matters in life. We love hearing from you. So tell us in the comments where you are watching from and what part of the story spoke to your soul. Remember, like Richard discovered, it is never too late to open a door, let in the light, and begin again.